We are supremely honored to have our next guest here, Mr. Daniel Ellsberg, known to the world, obviously, as the man behind the Pentagon Papers, which revolutionized the world then. I'll also say the author of a great book, The Doomsday Machine, Confessions of a Nuclear War Planner. Mr. Ellsberg, thank you so much for being with us here on the Freedom Side.
Thanks for the opportunity. Thank you.
No, absolutely. Well, I want to ask you this. We're here in the 50-year anniversary of the Pentagon Papers. Looking back, do you feel as if things have improved for those who want to blow the whistle on war crimes and malfeasance, or has it gotten worse, or is it the same?
The technical change to the digital era means that an individual can put out an enormously larger volume of data than I was able to. In the age of Xerox, 7,000 pages was pushing the envelope for me. Wouldn't have been possible before that, actually. But I couldn't put out the hundreds of thousands of pages that Ed Snowden or Chelsea Manning back in 2000 pages. So in one case, it's much easier to get information out. I don't have to copy it, download it. On the other hand, their ability to trace the people who have done this is very much larger, especially given the surveillance of newsmen we've had, news people, for years now. We've just seen that with the Trump administration having investigated journalists a great deal. It's very hard for a journalist now to in good conscience, promise or guarantee anonymity to a source. In fact, they can't. It would be bad faith to do that. There's just too much surveillance of their telephone communications and their iPhone travels and everything else. So and now what's different from 50 years ago is that I was the first, or at least I always thought I was the first. Just in the last week or two, somebody's made me aware that there was an earlier case that I never heard of, amazingly, a guy named John Nickerson in 1957. So I said, well, for 50 years, I've been saying I was the first person prosecuted for leaking to the American public. I can't say that anymore. But it took another 10 years for a second case, Samuel Loring Morrison, who was, by the way, eventually pardoned by President Clinton for selective prosecution. They weren't prosecuting anybody else. And then another more than 10 years for a third case. Then Obama, who had promised the transparent administration, came in and totally went back on that promise, and he prosecuted 3 times as many as the 3 who had earlier been indicted, starting with me or starting with John Nickerson, call it 4, but of all presidents put together. So he prosecuted about 9 people, or between 8 and 10, how you count some of them, General Petraeus, for example. But Trump prosecuted 8 in his first term, and for the first time prosecuted a journalist. Now Nixon, namely Julian Assange, Nixon had in fact intended to indict Hedrick Smith and Neil Sheehan of the New York Times. Very few people know of that. It was a Boston grand jury that finally adjourned without having indicted them for reasons probably related to the government crimes that ended my trial. Same had been done on them, warrantless wiretaps. But in any case, they didn't get to indictment. Julian is the first. And if he is extradited and brought over here, prosecuted, he will probably be convicted at the lower level. And it'll be the first conviction of a journalist. It will not be the last. It'll be the first of a stream of journalists. And genuine investigative journalism of the so-called national security state, which has very little to do with national security, but it has a lot to do with imperial security or the security of the officials managing the empire. And that the investigative journalism will essentially stop. There will still be some, because there'll be people who are willing to go to prison like that. I think Neil Sheehan would have probably, James Risen, Cy Hirsch, my friend Cy Hirsch, a few others, but it won't be very many. And the sources will have dried up, and we'll be even more authoritarian than we are now.
Well, I'm glad you said that the issue of the so-called security of so many of these documents. I've been reading The Best and the Brightest by David Halberstam, and I was commenting on someone about it, and I just said, I mean, I'm 35, so I know about the Pentagon Papers. I know about it. It happened, but I'm still just so shocked reading the book at how deliberately they were keeping secret things that they then went out and told the public, oh, we're going to win the war, we're going to do these other things. And they knew unequivocally it wasn't the case. And it really does feel that there's a level of criminality sometimes to this element of secrecy where people are saying it's some great secret, but in reality, they're covering up their own complicity in such a powerful way.
That's right. That's true. And in fact, to put it bluntly, under the way the Department of Justice has been applying the Espionage Act now, it is unquestionably criminal to release classified information that reveals utmost criminality. There's no limit to the criminality that might be concealed there. Nevertheless, if it's classified, that has nothing to do, and you have no ability under the Espionage Act to tell the jury why you did this or what the nature of it was or what the impact was. That's absurd. The idea that you can have a democracy and popular sovereignty when crimes which occur all the time, can simply be stamped secret and that's it. You're unaccountable. But it's not only crimes. It's lies, terrible judgments, crazy judgments that are not infrequent at all. And why do they classify everything and keep it secret? I finally figured that out because a lot of it doesn't look that incriminating at first. But you never know what's going to look bad 5 and 10 years from now. A prediction, an estimate, a policy may just look really terrible, which at the time you thought was all right. Classify it all and keep it classified. It's the dream of any bureaucrat to be unaccountable to anybody outside the system. And that's what we have.
Daniel Ellsberg, it's interesting because, during the Obama administration, his Justice Department had decided that prosecuting Julian Assange was not a good idea because then they would essentially be putting journalism on trial, right? Because then they'd have to prosecute the New York Times and all these other outlets that had published essentially the same things that WikiLeaks had published. My camera's about to turn off, Eugene. I'm just warning, but I do want to. I wanted to ask a question, and I'm still going to ask it since my microphone is still working.
We can
and
hear
that is that under the Trump administration.
Oh, well, now we lost Rob. There you go.
NSA at work, they never sleep.
Yeah.
Okay. You can still hear me or no? You
we
can't
can. Go ahead.
I can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my question, you can hear me. My voice is loud enough that it's like you can see me. So Trump reversed course on this position, and he prosecuted Assange, and he tried to have him extradited. And now we have a new president. We have Joe Biden, who has yet to reverse that, even though he was a part of the Obama administration. It was their Justice Department that initially decided it was a bad idea to prosecute Julian Assange. And the reason I'm saying this is because we have this clip we want to show of Antony Blinken, who was addressing a group of French reporters. And one French reporter actually asked him about Assange. And I think that his response was very revealing. So can we watch that clip?
Sur le lanceur d'alerte Julian Assange, il est toujours menacé d'extradition aux États-Unis. Il y a eu plusieurs appels ici en France et en Europe à abandonner les charges contre lui. Qu'est-ce que vous leur répondez aujourd'hui ?
Difficile pour moi de m'exprimer là-dessus parce qu'il y a un dossier juridique. Il faut que je laisse faire. Donc je vais laisser faire le processus juridique. Je comprends à la fois les questions et les émotions qui entourent ce dossier, mais c'est une question sur laquelle je ne peux pas vraiment m'exprimer.
Well, by the way, was that dubbed or was that really Blinken? Very good French, as far as I could hear. What a great Secretary of State, other than on any matter of policy. I have yet to see anything encouraging from Antony Blinken, from his debacle dealing with the Chinese to anything else. But how about his boss? Yes, he was a member of the Obama administration, but I doubt that Obama had the slightest sympathy for Assange either. And certainly as Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton did not. So it was his Department of Justice that just decided, look, to use this act, which it doesn't even allow a public interest defense, but in any way, to use it against a journalist is really too blatant a violation of the First Amendment, which speaks of Congress pass no law abridging freedom of the speech and freedom of the press, or religion, by the way. And, to prosecute a journalist for pursuing journalism would be inviting a Supreme Court throwing out the act altogether as unconstitutional, which they should do, and which they should have almost surely would have done back in my day if my case had gone up to the Supreme Court. No longer true, of course. The current court, they might well forget the Constitution, just as Trump did in indicting him. When Trump's DOJ indicted Assange, you can be sure, I doubt if they even bothered to tell Trump that there was a constitutional issue. I don't even know if his lawyers noticed that. But now Biden's people, I think, do know that. But Biden is the one who said in 2010 that Assange was a high-tech terrorist. Now, think about that. It's not just a little over the top. That's crazy. A terrorist for putting out information that, by the way, was not challenged as untrue and was definitely of public interest and all this. That made him a terrorist. Crazy. But has he changed? Probably not. All presidents hate leakers. And in the past, their departments of justice know enough about the Constitution to say, let's not test this one in the Supreme Court. But this one may, in the end, be tested, and we'll see whether the Supreme Court is capable of noticing that there is a First Amendment, or was.
Has the media become more obsequious, do you think? I mean, obviously, the New York Times runs the op-ed commemorating the 50 years of the Pentagon by bringing a guy in to call you a criminal and say that it would have been right for them to put you in jail. And I just thought, I guess they can print whatever viewpoint they want, but it just seemed astonishing to me that this is the first editorial op-ed they have about the Pentagon Papers as someone like, yeah, Daniel Ellsberg is a criminal. So I wonder, do you feel the media is more obsequious, or is it just, I don't know, maybe it's easy when it's right in front of your face to see it?
Look, they were like that then. That hasn't changed. I didn't take that. I am interested that you notice that. You're the only person, aside from me, maybe, and I think my family noticed that on their front page on June 13th, the 50th anniversary, up at the top, this sort of crawl at the top, they advertised this particular op-ed denouncing me as having, assaulted the Constitution, something like that. A crazy statement, which I didn't take it personally because that guy has been saying that for 50 years. Back in 2006, and we're talking about, let's see, that's before Assange. In 2006, when the New York Times published belatedly after the election of 2004, information they had all ready to go before the election of 2004 with George W. Bush, the information that Bush had been lying when he said we don't listen in on any Americans without a warrant. And that was totally false. Snowden proved that with documents later. But the guy who told him that, including Thomas Tam and others, did not have documents. But the Times, James Risen, actually, had talked to a lot of people who in the government who were saying, we're doing it, and it is unconstitutional, and it is illegal. So they were all ready to go. And then what was his name? The head of the Times, managing editor, Bill Keller, takes it to the White House, which tells him, if you publish this, you'll have blood on your hands. Meaning what? The next terrorist attack will blame on you. You put this out, you did it. And that won't be good for you. So they held it for a year, and they were not about to put it out until James Risen, the guy who'd found this out, the reporter, was about to bring out a book with this in and scoop the Times. So at the last minute, they went back to his old story, put it out, got a Pulitzer Prize for it, which they earned. And Bill Keller was not impeached, or whatever the journalistic equivalent of that might be, as he should have been for holding it on. It was partly because of that Ed Snowden did not bother to give his information to the New York Times. He saw it would be sat on exactly by them. So this, okay, which I've repressed his name. What's the name of the guy who wrote that op-ed? You just commented on it. I know it, but it's not one that I like to keep. The guy wrote the op-ed.
Oh my God!
You don't
Now,
remember?
see, now we all are
I'll think of
forgetting.
it. I know it. I'm 90. What's your excuse? But anyway, at any rate, he wrote an article in commentary in 2006. The story came out 2005 belatedly. It's proven 8 years later by Ed Snowden. But so they get the Pulitzer Prize for 2005. In 2006, this guy, let him be nameless. Why not? Why reveal the guilty here? Writes an article in commentary that the Times and its reporters should be tried for Espionage Act for putting that out. Okay? So when he does it against me, that's not exactly news to me. He'd said the same thing about me many years before. But I do agree with you. It's eyebrow raising when the Times chooses that guy to write the op-ed on the 50th anniversary. What if they learned damn little?
Yes.
The Times or anybody else. The Times is very responsible for the horrible Washington reporting that enabled us to get into Vietnam and stay in Vietnam. And the same Times was much more active even with Judy Miller and others in spreading lies about Iraq. Years later, they did nothing to keep us out of Iraq. On the contrary, they helped us get in. And when it came to getting out, what have they done? Nothing in the way of it. And go back to 50 years of the Pentagon Papers. Strictly speaking, that did not end the war or shorten the war. If I and the Times had only put out the Pentagon Papers, which ended in 68 under Johnson, they didn't go into the Nixon regime, which was what I was concerned about in 69 when I copied them, 70, 71. If it had only been the latter stuff, the 68 stuff and before, the public showed no inclination to judge from what I was trying to put out about 4 previous presidents who had lied us into Vietnam and kept it going, that a 5th might be doing the same. That was my single motive for getting this out. If I'd had documents on Nixon, I would not have bothered with history. But I put out what I had and tried to say, look, 4 previous presidents did it. Nixon is still lying to you. He's still making threats. This war is going to go on, and it's going to get larger in the air, as it did. No one believed me. And I just happened to be thinking back about it. The Times did not lift a finger once to find out what Nixon's actual policy was. He's getting us out. Yes. Now, why in retrospect did that take 6 years? Why did 20,000 more Americans have to die while he was getting us out? What were the issues? What was the disagreement between Nixon and Le Duan in Vietnam? I'll bet you, neither of you, very well informed, no answers to that. I bet you have no answer. And I'll even have to say from my experience, if you had an answer, it would probably be wrong, because I know the sources and they're wrong. The Times has never gotten that. Neil Sheehan never got it in the Times. So the Pentagon Papers by themselves, it turns out, as I just said to my wife at lunch today, talking about current situation and the Pentagon Papers, I'm saying people are unwilling to learn from past presidents about what's going on now, what questions they should be asking, what doubts they should have. We're always hearing about how can people believe all these crazy conspiracy theories? Well, one part of it is that our empire has been run conspiratorially forever, and the government is run as a conspiracy. And they lie to us about getting us into Vietnam. I'm sorry if I sound like a member of QAnon or something. No, I'm not saying they are a satanic child trafficking ring. I am saying that they have killed hundreds of thousands of children wrongly in Vietnam and Iraq and Somalia and all over the place. Wherever we're droning, we are killing children. And when people said to LBJ, hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today? he took that, of course, as just an intolerable insult. It was a perfectly straightforward question. How many kids did we kill today? We weren't counting them. We never have. We never have. How many kids have we killed in Iraq? See if you can find that on WikiLeaks as a government statement. Nothing. And the American people haven't asked. Okay. That's, in other words, that hasn't changed. The press hasn't changed. What did happen 50 years ago was that Nixon's domestic crimes against me, which turned out during at the end of the trial, did in fact serve to bring him down. In those days, the acts he took against me, 1971, 72, 73, were then domestic crimes. Warrantless wiretaps. Give me a break. No problem now. Totally, what could be more legal? CIA involved in doing psychological profiles of me and lending their assets to incapacitate me totally. Obama set the record and let it leak out that he had killed by drone on a list Anwar al-Awlaki, an American citizen, born in America, without trial, due process, nothing. And then weeks later, killed his 16-year-old son by drone. We've never really heard what happened there. And somebody told me the other day that Trump had killed his daughter, sort of finishing off the family like a typical mafia chief. So how much does the American public care about that? That has in effect legitimized assassination, including of me. And if they could get Ed Snowden, he'd be gone. So that's part of the deal now. Yeah. In other words, things that were clearly criminal 50 years ago have now been legalized by the Patriot Act after 9/11, or in many other cases. In theory, torture is the most criminal thing you can find. Obama refused to prosecute anyone for it, in effect, decriminalizing. You know, the way some states decriminalized marijuana, they didn't prosecute it on the way to legalizing it. Well, torture has been decriminalized. I don't know if people have noticed that, but it would be pretty hard to bring a case against some new torturer after the last 10 years of non-prosecution. So, in short, the empire hasn't learned because the empire's doing what it wants to do. Fine, it hasn't. What's to learn? It didn't make any mistakes as far as I'm concerned. They certainly didn't pay any price for it, nobody. And it's not a matter of telling them, hey, you shouldn't be determining the regime of this other country, regime change that is not part of the USA. Now, regime change is just every day in the papers, no problem. So we're moving from being a covert empire, where we denied we were an empire and denied what we were doing to keep it, to what's something closer to an overt empire, when we just talk very openly about our right to change the government of Iran or Syria or anywhere else. So Haiti, Honduras. Were we involved in the assassination yesterday? I don't know. Could we have been? Of course, kind of thing we do all the time. Might we not have been? Yeah, we're not the only murderers in the world.
You know, it seems that, and I'm glad you pointed that out in terms of the empire doing what it wants to do, because, I mean, obviously there's a threat of prosecution for whistleblowers, but it seems like the other thing is you have to essentially assume your career in the civil service is just over 100% if you bring any of this out. And that, in fact, I mean, you know, not to keep representing the best and the brightest, but the thing that had kept striking me page by page is people who would be privately saying we should not be doing this, producing papers, doing that, and then going out in public saying the exact opposite because the only way to advance your career is to advance the lie.
That's very good. Let me ask you, what are the pages you're reading? You've been reading very well. What is it you're reading?
The Best and the Brightest by David Halberstam.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. He had to, by the way, stop that for a year. It was about to come out when the Pentagon Papers came out. He had to hold it back for a year to incorporate what was to be found in the Pentagon Papers. David Halberstam's a terrific guy, but he didn't have the Pentagon Papers when he first wrote it. And the reason he had to revise it was he had thought, he really did think, that Lyndon Johnson had been misled by the military year by year, telling him that we're about to win. They never told him that. That was the theme of his book. Never. Not once did they say. Did they tell him it was unwinnable? No. People think the Pentagon Papers said that. Never. They said it is winnable if you do it our way, not your way. Your way will not win. It will only stalemate bloody. Our way will win. Johnson looked at that, and I think rightly, between those two, he chose his way, which was a bloody, escalating stalemate, because the other way will bring China in. We'll be in nuclear war with China. I think that was right. But what you're saying is not to be found in the Pentagon Papers, which is this: the government was filled with high-level people who not only thought that we're not going to win, they all thought that. In fact, everybody in Vietnam thought that with what we're doing. You could see that we're not in the process of winning. I was there 2 years, but it didn't take 2 years for most people to realize that. Could it be won? No, these people knew it couldn't be won, not at any acceptable cost or anything. We should get out. But not one said that to Congress or the press or the public. Not one. So it's filled with people not only who knew that what they were saying to the public about progress was a lie, keeping the war going. That's all of them who spoke to the public. But they also knew that everything they were doing from day to day to pursue the war was killing people to no end. And they didn't know, the Pentagon Papers, that had been wrong from the start. When we were supporting the French earlier, they didn't know that history. And their boss in the State Department, Dean Rusk, said the opposite, said that Geneva, he said this privately and publicly. I heard him, he convinced me. Geneva in 1954, which ended the French War, which we had been financing 80% of, he said, that established two sovereign states, and one of them is now invading the other. That was a total hoax. It is not different from saying there is no man-made climate crisis. Oxyhydrochloroquine cures COVID. To say that Geneva established two sovereign states, passing over the fact that Geneva called for a national election in 56 for the whole nation of Vietnam. There was not two states, there was one state, and an election in 56, which we said no to. We supported a guy, Diem, who said he would never do that. And anyway, we lied to. I even believed that one until I read the Pentagon Papers. So we come back to the point, if I may, it's struck more than I was before at how many people actually believed by, if not by as early as 65, by 66, 67, 68, 69, we got to get out of there. Not one of them said that to the public. Nobody. They didn't give up their careers, which, as you say, it would have meant giving up their career. No, that's out of the question. I just wrote a note to myself finally today as I'm thinking about it. And these people, in not opposing publicly the wrongful policy of a president who had appointed them, that they'd worked for, were not rejecting an option. It was unthinkable. To do that, which could have saved millions of lives then, or in a nuclear situation, billions, don't count on anyone doing it. Because even if they know this is catastrophic, this is the end for humanity, going in this direction, we're gambling on threatening nuclear weapons over Taiwan, for example. We're gambling with the lives of billions of people when we do that. You shouldn't expect that one single person at my rank, top civil service rank or higher, will tell us what they believe, because that would betray the president. Now, that's not unlike a fascist regime or a Stalinist communist regime or a Tojo regime or, there's other countries, a Saudi Arabian regime. How's that? Our ally, Saudi Arabia. So, no, people don't do that unless we demand of some of them that they tell us what they know,
Mhm.
which we don't. We knew the war wasn't winning. We didn't know that people inside knew that and were pursuing it anyway. But unless they tell Congress that and tell us that, we're doomed. It's not just this country. In the
Mhm.
nuclear era and the climate era, civilization is doomed. But it's
I have one.
possible that
I
it will change.
I have one question
Yeah,
for you,
please.
Daniel, and I
You're
think
still
you've
with us.
probably been
Thank
asked
you.
this before. You've probably been asked this before, but I'm just curious how you respond to this notion that there's some sort of distinction between what you did, what someone like you did, and then what somebody very bad like Julian Assange did and what Chelsea Manning did. There are these people who do try to make this distinction as though there's like a difference because they want to justify the treatment of Julian Assange and the treatment of Chelsea Manning while also still saying, oh, but the Pentagon Papers were different. So how do you respond to that commentary?
Well, I think you know how I've been responding to that for more than a decade. Since
I do, but I want to hear it
2010,
again.
with Chelsea Manning since 2010, I'm saying there is no difference in motivation from what she did. He was then Bradley Manning. What she did and what I did. Motives were the same. And to stop unjustified killing, homicide, murder, in her case, torture, which I didn't know as much about at the time. She revealed a lot of torture by us. And no difference there. And it's silly to say that there is. Of course, we're different in personalities and background and so forth. I'm very impressed that people as young as Chelsea Manning then was, or Ed Snowden was then compared to me, did see the light much earlier than I did and acted earlier than I did. But in terms of the action, there's no difference. 3 years later, 8 years ago, Ed Snowden saying the same. So as you say, it's just people who want to justify their condemnation of Chelsea Manning or Ed Snowden, but don't want to say, I'm against all whistleblowing. So they turn to say, well, Ellsberg, in 50 years, no harm has been ever presented that my revelations had, only if anything. I'm saying not much benefit either. What did help was Nixon's crimes against me in a very reasonable belief that I might be able to prove what I was saying about his threats of nuclear weapons and his escalation. Very reasonable to him because people who not only worked for him but resigned from him might have taken documents, but they hadn't. As one of them, Roger Moore, said to me with an admission that such as I've never heard from anybody else. He said, we should have thrown open the safe and screamed bloody murder because that's exactly what it was. And that's true. But I haven't heard anybody else in the 50 years say that. But it's true of everyone who served with me. Everyone who served with me. It was their duty, I should say, except the ones who blindly believed in the cause to the end. Okay, not them. That wasn't very many. Dean Rusk, maybe Elrich himself, Walt Rostow. These are names you don't remember from the distant past. But they managed to believe in this from nobody else. But they dropped 4 times the tonnage of World War II without believing that what they were doing was doing anybody any good, except maybe keeping them in office, which it didn't do. LBJ lost office, as he was warned by Hubert Humphrey, but he was not called a loser. And that was worth the lives of several million Vietnamese, that Lyndon Johnson did not go to his grave ever having been called weak or a loser. And that's enough to keep any war going. Any war going. I don't know a leader of any kind who's been willing to stop a war saying it's not going anywhere. In fact, it was wrong from the start. No more lives should be lost. As Senator Gravel, who just died, and who was the single person in Congress who had the guts to read the Pentagon Papers in a subcommittee, go back to one of your questions. I asked him in 2007 after the election. I said, Mike, are the current Democrats extraordinarily cowardly as they look? And he said, no, ordinarily cowardly, same as before. And that hasn't happened. But now look in history and think of somebody, every war has had at least one side where it's reasonable, where everybody else in the world can see that was a mistake, at least to prolong it and probably to stop it, to start it. But even if it was in some sense reasonable to start it, to keep it going, I'm talking now about World War I, the Civil War, the South, say, for example, and others. It so happens, I know I'm going on here, but it just so happens that I picked a book off my shelf by Albert Speer, the number 3 man of the Nazi regime, who spent 20 years in Spandau prison. Only 20 years, because the others were executed. He was the only one who admitted fault, wrong. He said, I deserve the same sentence as the other. And they gave him credit for that, for saying it, but gave him only 20 years. But he said that he felt he was as guilty for what he didn't do, but didn't oppose, as any of them were for the worst things they did too. Now, not one, I'm sorry, what really got me was I was reading the last chapters. The last days of Hitler, the last months of Hitler, February, the war ended in May 8th. In February, everybody around Hitler, with 3 exceptions, you won't know the names, but Jodl, Ley, and Bormann. There were 4 with Adolf Hitler who believed maybe something will turn up, maybe we can pull this off. And we should keep going. All the others believed catastrophe. The country is being destroyed. Not one was willing to oppose Hitler at that point, to say hello, let alone to say to the world. And I was thinking, that's not different from Vietnam or Iraq. I've never heard of one brigadier general or higher in the active army who believed it was a good idea to invade Iraq. I've asked a lot of people, none, but it got done. And we see the effects, but we don't see much of the effects because the deaths have not been counted or told to us at all. So I look over history as a whole and I say, if you look at every war, at least one set of leaders should be saying, this got to stop, this should stop, this isn't going anywhere. That didn't happen in the Confederacy or anywhere else.